Hello, Michal Hucko here and welcome to another lecture of our REST API class. In this lecture, we're going to talk about how to create an endpoint for a specific subject details. So let's jump right to the swappy.dev to show you by examples what I mean under creating the details page. So in the swappy.dev, there is an endpoint or URL where you can get list of people within the movies, Star Wars movies, right? This endpoint is very similar to the endpoint from the previous lesson where we created the endpoint called subjects, which is returning lists of subjects and there is a specific dictionary or JSON for a specific subject where was just the name in this case. If you look here, this list is right now in the results part can be very big and each JSON or each dictionary can have a lot of fields. But in this specific JSON, you will see that there is the URL, a URL identifier which will redirect us to a detail page for this specific person, for example, Luke Skywalker. So let's click on this URL and open it in another tab. And you will see that for this specific person, Luke Skywalker, we can get this detail page running the get slash API slash people slash one. This one is a unique identifier for this person within the database, right? So this detail page allows us to create a dynamic or this kind of using this unique identifier allows us to create these dynamic URLs where we don't need to create, like, for example, for each person a specific URL and a specific view, but we're going to create a dynamic view which will change the content based on the database, of course, and based on the ID which we specify here. This method or this approach is called query param values or query parameters. And these query parameters specify the dynamic content or what we are expecting to be returned from the backend, right? So with this approach, we can send, for example, integers in this case, or strings or other values within our URL, and we don't need to put it into the body. So this is some important thing because many times people are confused when to use JSON body or when to use query params. And this is an ideal example in case of REST, how you should use the query params. So for example, for these detail pages, right? So let's jump right to the Visual Studio Code where we have the previous version. You can get the link to my GitHub page in the description below. And how to start with this? So first we need to specify the URL pattern, right? In order to get these dynamic URLs work. So how are we gonna do it? So the same way as previously. And as you have seen, in case of the swappy, the specification is like there is this general page called people in plural, and then there is this specific dynamic page specified by the query parameter, right? So we do it the same way in our case. So I go here and I put here like subjects, and in order to specify the query param, I use this backslash, and here the query params need to be specified in these special brackets, and inside you need to specify the type. And this is sometimes funny for me. Okay, I'm programming in Python and I need to specify the type. Yes, you should, because this query param is then being evaluated and this prevents some intruders to disrupt your code or put there some SQL injection and this kind of stuff, which you maybe don't know what it is. I recommend Googling some stuff on the internet about SQL injections. So I'm saying it's an integer because we're going to use it as a key to specify or to distinguish between the subjects which are stored, in this case, inside our program at runtime, but later in the database. So let me just demonstrate. In the views, we had these subjects, and previously there was just key value only name, right? Well, I add one more pair, which will be in this case ID, and there will be a unique. I will make sure it's a unique, but later we're gonna let Python to do that. Unique identifier for each of these, subjects inside our array. So going back to URLs, I'm saying it's an integer, and here I put the name of the parameter which I'm going to use later, and in this case I name it like primary key pk, which is a convention. Now what you need to do is to specify a view for this. We're going to call it subject detail, detail, right? And of course the name, and the name in this case we're going to use English will be the same. I'm sorry, I just copied this part, put this part here. Perfect. So in order to work, we need to specify this view. So I'm going back here and I put here this CRS, sorry, CR exempt, putting here the name, def, the name, and the function in this case is not only getting the request parameter, but because we specified the query param, it also receives this value from the URL as a parameter, and you can name the value as you want. I'm going to name it the same way. So PK, and then you can use it inside here. So when we call, for example, subjects/1, we want this endpoint to return this dictionary in a JSON format, right? So first thing, we need to make sure that this primary key, which is being specified within the query param, exists inside our database. So first, like, good practice is to make sure it's there, or just to query it from there. And we can accomplish this by many ways, and I'm going to use some special, construct of Python, which are the generators. I recommend reading something about there. So I'm trying to get the subject from this list of subjects, specifying a next function on top of a generator, because generator provides us this next function. And inside the specification, I will use the list comprehension like syntax. I want to return subject for subject in subjects. And because I would like to later also adjust this subject's value, and it's like a global value, I need to specify it with the keyword global. Global subjects. This is an anti-pattern, but I'm doing it here just to show you how to use it without database. Later in the future lessons, we're going to use database, and this, workaround will be a little different and correct. Let's just watch, maybe you will learn something new. So I'm iterating for subjects through the subjects, and I'm returning subject only if the subject ID is equal to the primary key, which I specified inside our query param, right? So in this case, I'm returning it. In case, for example, I'm trying to get a primary key which is not part of my database, in this case, this list of dictionaries, the next function will return an object which is called stop iteration. It's an error like message. It's a custom error for the generators, and it's an exception, of course. And this exception, in case of this exception, I would like to return a JSON response saying a status. It's quite good practice to put here a status saying there is no subject for the ID, and I'm put here PK, right? There needs to be a double equals, and this is a formatted string. Perfect. So in case the subject is not part of the database, I will return this error message. So now when I prepared everything, like this pre-part, where I just want to make sure that PK is a valid value, has a valid value, I can run now or specify now concrete method get. So in case of get, what I want to do is I want to return a JSON response with the dictionary which I filtered from the subject list of dictionaries. And that's all. This is the get method. So when I save this, now I will just make sure that the server is running well, so there are no errors. In the terminal output, this is Python manage pyrun server from the previous lessons. And if I go back to the Postman, these are the old endpoints, and I also prepared some new ones. So the old ones are still working. I'm able to query all the subjects, and I'm also able to add new subject inside here with the post request. But for the purpose of this lesson, I put here 3 other endpoints or requests which I'm gonna test. First request is calling /school/subject/ in this case 3, and it's trying to retrieve the value from the subject with the ID of 3. Let's put this to 1, just make sure it works, because starting and restarting the server will make it to have just 2 values, right? So in case you want to be 100% sure, you put here 1. So please try to create this request first. Don't just look at inside the video. Also do it by your own, right? Try to implement it on your own, right? So localhost 8000 school subjects 1, when I send, I get the maths. Perfect. What happens if I put here some nonsense number like this big? I send, and the status code is sorry, there is no subject for the ID, blah, blah, blah. Perfect. Let's now try to implement the put method. Before we do that, let's think about what put should do. Later in the, like previously in the lessons, I was talking that put is the method which is connected with the update functionality. Sometimes we want to update something. Imagine you have some account on YouTube and you want to change your username or email, right? You are going to settings and then you are sending update request to the server to adjust your, for example, values in the fields which you have there. Right, so how we do that, how we implement this endpoint, we use the put endpoint, of course, sorry, put method. And in case of put, you are not only sending a query parameter, you also need to send inside the body the JSON, which will specify the changes which you want to make on top of your, record, right? So again, just to be 100% clear with you, or open with you, there is also a function which is called patch, or method which is called patch, which is very similar to put. In this case, we're gonna talk just about put, and we want to change the whole object inside the subject as one, right? We are not want to adjust just some fields. We always need to provide all the values for all the fields. So that's the reason why we are using put. So here we are saying, please adjust the subject at the school, right, application with the ID one to name history. So if you go back to subjects and you run the subjects, right now it's maths. So we need to implement it first. And how do we implement that? So because we are getting, okay, we start very simply, right? It's like the method, it's in this case put, right? And because the put is very closely resembling the post, we will do very similar things as before. Previously in the lesson, I showed you that you are accepting a byte stream. And before working with the body, you need to convert it to a dictionary using, for example, in this case, so this will be like a new subject binary or bytes. You can put there like bytes. So what I need to do is convert it to a new subject by running this JSON load test function, and I go here and put load test function here. Perfect. So now I have the new subject inside this variable. And what I now need to do, because I'm using this array, okay, a list, please don't concentrate right now on what I'm doing. Just think about it later. We're going to use database now. Just for the purpose of simplicity, I have it inside this array. So what I need to do now, I need to find the index of the subject which I want to change, index within this array. There are many ways how you can accomplish this. I decided I'm going to show it in this way. So I'm going to use like a subjects. So like new subject index is equals to subjects index, and I'm trying to get the index of the subject. Perfect. This will return the index inside the array of the old subject. This is the old subject. Perfect. And on this index, I'm going to run the subject. And I put here this new subject index. I believe if there are some JavaScript guys looking at me working with React are having now a headache, right? So I'm putting here the new subject. Perfect. And when I do this, now the question is what should be returned? In case of put request, it's quite a good practice to return the adjusted record. Not the whole list of records, but just the adjusted one. Of course, it's up to you what you will return, but I will do it this way. So I'm sending JSON response, in this case, new subject. And just to let everyone know that everything is done well, I will send 201 record created. Whatever, it can be 200, 201, it's up to you based on the design. So saving this and going back here, okay, again, make sure that the server is running. There are no issues. So sending this, getting the subject list, you will see that right now, because I restarted the server, there are just two of them. And now what I'm doing, I'm saying, please change this one to history. And when I send this, it returns the history, the new object, and going back to the subject list, sending the request again, you will see it's history right now. It's not the math as it was before. And when I go here back to this specific get subject ID endpoint or request, and I put here 1, it will say history. Perfect. So this endpoint is working with this method. Perfect. The last thing what we need to do is implement the delete functionality. Sometimes you want to delete or give the option to your visitors or users to delete some resources within your database. And that's the purpose of delete. So in this case, when you run a delete method on school subjects 1, the record with the subject 1 ID should be deleted from the database. In this case, from the variable with the list of subjects. So how are we going to implement this? Very simply, I just go here and I put here elif. So yeah, it should be elif and I go request method, not put, but in this case, I go with the request method delete. And in this case, I'm not doing anything else. I will use again a little hack. So I'm overriding or rewriting the original subjects here with a list filter function, which is accepting a lambda with the subject as a variable. And I just want the subjects which doesn't have the ID not equals to the primary key which I sent. Yeah? In this case, I made sure like it's deleted. If you don't understand these MapReduce filter functions in Python, I highly recommend watching something on the internet about this. I also have a very nice Skillshare class about that. Perfect, linked in the description, of course. So, subjects. Perfect. So these are the new subjects, and now what I need to do is just return JSON response. And in case of delete, it's quite a good practice to not return anything, just saying everything went well. So that's in order to do that, you can send a status of, in this case, it's 204. 204 is a no content status code saying like, okay, everything went well, but there is no response. You can continue with what you are doing. Perfect. So by running this, again, make sure that the server is perfect. Server is perfect. Going back here and running the delete function again. No response, but some error. No response, but some error. Going to the error logs, you will see that init for JSON response required positional argument data. Oh yeah, I made a mistake. So it's not, it shouldn't be a JSON response, it should be an HTTP response because I'm not providing any response body, right? So going back, pressing save, this will reload the server. It may take a couple of seconds, so just make sure you are waiting until it's reloaded. Going back to the Postman, just make sure that the subject endpoint is working. Yeah, we have two of them, and now running delete, and when I run it, I got 204, no content, perfect. That's like 200 like status code, so we know everything is working fine. Going back to subject, sending the get request to the subjects, I see there is just one right now. Perfect. So we now implemented this detail endpoint with get, put, delete method. Those are right now we have all the methods from CRUD, create, read, update, delete. And we are able to work with some more complicated constructs later in the lessons. Now you need to understand a couple of things. Right now we are not using database. In the next videos, I'm going to show you how you can connect this to a PostgreSQL database. Next thing, what you need to keep in mind that right now I'm using some Python code to work around this subjects list. In the future, we're going to use more simpler tools which are provided to us by Django REST framework. Those are perfect tools, and they are also handling for you something which is called validation. Now, let's just make a stop and think about validation. Currently, the solution which we provide allows us, for example, to rewrite the subject with the ID 1 and set this ID to 3. In this case, we may end up with a couple of subjects having the same ID, and that's wrong because we need a unique identifier in order to access it through the query params. Right, of course, the implementations allows us to do this. So as your homework, try to implement a validation inside this piece of code, which will not allow you to change the ID. So the ID within the body of a new, which you received here, you should make sure that within this body, the ID is the same as the primary key which you are accessing. Try to implement this. In case it's not, you should return some error, right? Saying the user or the client like, yo, you should use a different ID within the body. You cannot change the ID, right? Try to play around this. Later in the lessons, I'll show you how you can use a Django REST framework to overcome this problem for free, almost for free. Perfect. So that's everything for today. Thank you very much for watching. I hope I will see you in the next lesson.